Now, parking, zoning law section 405-34G.
Yeah, and it's not, Mr. Chairman, it's not even certain if we need an area variance for parking, but I didn't want to leave something, out.
Okay. My only question there is why is it G? I mean, what I'm assuming you're going, and you know what happens when you assume, but I'm assuming that you're going to invoke H for the waiver because you're within 400 feet of a municipal.
Yes, the
operated-
planning board can waive the requirement, and it's kind of a convoluted requirement because the zoning law requires, these vast parking areas and, all set up, but it wasn't, I think it's written without the idea that this in and of itself is a parking garage. It's not.
Now, who is going to own the garage? The city of Kingston or the developer?
No, the private developer will own it.
All right, so the language is if it's within 400 feet of a municipally operated off-street parking facility. So we'll let the planning board handle waivers, but, excuse me. But my question is, if you need a variance, again, I'm not telling you how to do your job, but I would believe that you need a variance from that section J that basically lists the number of spaces that are required for each room of the hotel, each apartment, and a calculation of how many parking spaces this particular development's going to use. I believe it's 143 units of apartments. If they were all single-bedroom apartments, that's 1.5 spaces per each apartment under J, and one per room with 32-room boutique. We need some kind of quantification as to what J would produce, and I would assume that would be, if you're not going to seek the waiver.
We'll provide that too.
That's the
Dennis is
variance.
working on that too.
Okay, so I would think that in the future, it should be G and J,
Okay.
all right? Just so we're all on the same page of this for the future. Also, while I'm thinking of it, and then I'll let you make your presentation, but I believe you mentioned somewhere in your letter that 7 units of affordable housing have been added to the building. I was under the impression it was 14.
There's 14 units total. There's 7 multifamily units that have been added to the top of the building.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear if somebody coughed.
There's 14 units of affordable housing that have been added in total. 7 units have been added to the top of the building, but they are not the affordable housing units. They are just multifamily units. The affordable housing is interspersed throughout the structure.
But F says, even with the additional 7 units of affordable housing added to the building. That's what your letter
Correct.
says under F.
It should not say affordable housing because not all those are affordable.
Even with the additional...
None of those are the affordable
Even with
units.
the additional 7 units,
Correct.
not of affordable...
Should say units of multifamily housing. That's
what?
correct. Of multifamily housing.
To be clear, how many units of affordable housing are there
14 total.
total?
Yeah.
So it should read multifamily.
And they have to,
instead.
by law, they have to be interspersed throughout the structure.
So it's 7, even with the additional 7 units of multifamily housing added to the building, the height of the structure will not exceed height limitations.
Correct.
Is that a correct sentence there?
That's correct.
Can I clarify something?
Sure.
Okay. With regard, just going back to the parking part of it, the numbers with regard to parking and the representations by the developer has been quite confusing. So going back to the parking, it would be really wonderful to clarify very specifically what the requirements are for the proposed development
Absolutely.
on the parking garage, so that we know exactly how many spaces are required under the code and how many spaces will then be left that could be considered to be used for municipal parking. And just...
And how much of a variance we're...
Yeah,
gonna do.
and that would determine if there's any variance required with regard to parking. So those numbers, I would just love them to stop moving around and be hard and fast based
Yeah.
on our code.
Based
we-
on J, basically.
We will, what we'll do is, they've made a lot of statements about parking and considered it by the planning board at length, but what I'll have them do is I'll have Dennis and the applicant get together and provide an explanation of exactly how many parking spaces will be used for what and where that fits in under the code. We'll get an analysis that says that. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I have that right here. in a table.
Brian put it perfectly, but as far as I'm concerned, any parking variance is going to rely on J and the number that's produced
Correct.
versus what you can provide. That's the variance for parking. Okay, G is a nice paragraph, but it really doesn't mean anything to us, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of a variance.
Yes, and
J is the meat of the zoning code.
yeah, and like I said, we may actually ask for a waiver, but I didn't want to leave it out of the analysis here. So that would be a waiver from the planning board, so, but I didn't want to leave it out here.
I will let the planning board,
Yeah.
I have enough on my plate, I'll let the planning board handle
But
that one.
to your point, Tony, to your point, even when you apply for the waiver from the planning board, they need to know the specific number of spots you're asking to be waived.
Correct.
So the table that the two gentlemen requested would make sense, because it would also help with any future waiver you may need to ask for.
A good point. We will definitely provide that.
So, Mr. Moriello, that's the extent of, I hope I didn't take too much time, but
No,
I
it's all
think we
good.
now have a common ground and understanding of what this board will eventually use in determining variances for each of these items that is presented to us. Okay, so we're not going to set the date until the planning board makes their decision, and then I think it makes more sense, quite frankly, because then we know what variances we're dealing with if there's a negative or positive declaration. So, no date till planning board. All right, so, Mr. Moriello, Mr. Zell, any other thing you would like to add this evening?
No, that's it. That's
All
it.
right,
Thank
well-
you to the board.
Okay, thank you for, I think we accomplished a lot, even though it wasn't quite what it was supposed to be on either account, but, all right, so what I need,
Good night, Mike.
and please, we're going to need these, since we're going to have a motion, we're going to need these signed. On the Kingstonian, do I have a motion to set a table any decisions? We're tabling any decisions to on variances for future meeting.
Table until the planning board.
And no, not set meeting, not set date until planning board. Let me just write it down.
Tony, he can't hear you.
Well, I'm talking in the microphone.
But Eric can't hear you.
I'm talking, table the variance, the motion is to table the variances until future meeting. And not set a date until planning board acts.
And I make a motion.
And that's John. Second? Brian? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's 5-0.